The sun was setting behind a curtain of gray clouds, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The small town seemed quieter than usual, almost as if it too felt the weight of what had happened. A woman walked slowly down the empty street, her steps heavy with sorrow. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a bouquet of white flowers, her daughter's favorite. Each step brought her closer to the place she dreaded going but knew she had to visit, the morgue. Her heart ached with every breath she took. It had only been 3 days since the accident, but those days felt like an eternity. She replayed the phone call over and over in her mind, the voice on the other end telling her that her daughter wouldn't be coming home. That car crash had stolen everything from her in an instant. Now she was walking into a cold, sterile building to say goodbye for the very last time. As she pushed open the glass doors of the morgue, a rush of chilled air hit her face. The receptionist looked up from behind the desk, offering a sad smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be here for your daughter," the woman said softly. Nodding, the mother swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. The receptionist stood up and motioned for her to follow. They walked through long, narrow hallways lined with blank walls. The sound of their footsteps echoed eerily, making the silence even heavier. Finally, they stopped at a door marked viewing room. The receptionist opened it gently and stepped aside. Taking a deep breath, the mother entered the room. It was dimly lit, with just enough light to see clearly. In the center of the space stood a gurney covered by a crisp white sheet. Standing beside it was a man wearing a lab coat. He introduced himself as the medical examiner who had conducted the autopsy. His voice was calm, professional, but there was kindness in his tone as he explained what would happen next. He pulled back the sheet slowly, revealing her daughter's face. Time seemed to stop. For a moment, all she could do was stare. Her daughter looked so still, so unlike herself. This wasn't how she wanted to remember her, not lifeless and pale, but full of laughter and energy. Tears began streaming down her cheeks as she placed the bouquet of flowers next to her daughter's body. Her hands lingered on the soft petals of the lilies, searching for comfort in something familiar. But then something caught her eye. As she leaned in closer, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's forehead, she noticed a faint mark near her temple. At first glance, it looked like bruising, but something about it didn't seem right. She frowned, tilting her head slightly. This wasn't part of the injuries described in the police report. Confusion washed over her as she turned to the medical examiner. "What is this?" she asked, pointing at the mark. The man hesitated, his expression unreadable. After a pause, he spoke, explaining that it was likely post-mortem lividity, a natural occurrence after death. But his words lacked conviction, and his eyes darted away from hers. Something about his response made her stomach churn. She stared at the mark again, her mind racing with questions. Was this really normal? Or was there more to the story? The thought gnawed at her as she left the morgue later that evening. Instead of finding closure, she felt more unsettled than ever. What should have been a final goodbye now felt like the beginning of something far more complicated. Driving home under the darkening sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter's death wasn't as straightforward as everyone claimed, and deep down she knew she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. The ride home was a blur of tears and unanswered questions. The mother gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she replayed the image of that mark on her daughter's temple over and over in her mind. It wasn't just the mark itself. It was the way the medical examiner had hesitated, the way his eyes avoided hers when he explained it away. Something didn't add up, and no matter how hard she tried to push the thought aside, it kept pulling her back. That night, sleep eluded her. She sat alone in her living room, staring at the wall while the clock ticked loudly in the background. Her thoughts raced uncontrollably. What if the accident wasn't an accident? What if someone had hurt her daughter before the crash? These possibilities were too painful to consider, yet they refused to leave her alone. Finally, unable to sit still any longer, she got up and started pacing. There had to be a way to find out what really happened. Her first step was to request a copy of the full autopsy report. The next morning, she called the morgue, her voice shaking but determined. After some hesitation, they agreed to send it over. When the documents arrived later that day, she spread them out across her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Each line of text felt like a puzzle piece, but nothing seemed to fit together. One thing stood out, though the report mentioned no significant trauma to the head other than injuries consistent with the car crash. Yet the mark she'd seen on her daughter's temple told a different story. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, she decided to dig deeper. If the official records weren't giving her answers, maybe someone else could. She began reaching out to people who had known her daughter, friends, co-workers, acquaintances. At first, many were hesitant to talk, unsure of what to say or how to help. But as she persisted, bits and pieces of information started coming to light. One name kept surfacing: her daughter's ex-partner. Their relationship had ended badly, and rumors swirled about heated arguments and unresolved tension between them. The more she heard, the more uneasy she became. Determined to confront him, she tracked him down and arranged to meet. When they finally came face to face, she could see the unease in his expression before he even spoke. He denied having anything to do with the accident, his tone defensive and clipped. But the way he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact, only fueled her suspicion. She left the meeting feeling frustrated, but more convinced than ever that there was more to the story. Still, she needed proof, not assumptions. Hiring a private investigator felt like her best option, even though it meant spending money she didn't have. She scraped together what she could and hired someone recommended by a friend. Over the next few weeks, the investigator worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of evidence that painted a clearer picture. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed the ex-partner's car parked suspiciously close to her daughter's vehicle moments before the crash. Phone records revealed multiple calls between them leading up to that night. And then the breakthrough came. A witness who claimed to have seen the two arguing shortly before the accident occurred. Armed with this new information, she went straight to the police. At first, they were skeptical, brushing off her claims as grief-driven paranoia. But she refused to back down. She presented the evidence gathered by the investigator, insisting they reopen the case. Slowly, reluctantly, they agreed to take another look. As detectives reviewed the findings, pressure mounted on the ex-partner. During questioning, cracks began to show in his carefully constructed alibi. Eventually, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, he confessed. He admitted to losing control during their argument, shoving her in anger. Panicked and believing she was already dead, he fled the scene without calling for help. Hearing those words shattered her all over again, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. The truth, no matter how painful, was finally out in the open. Justice for her daughter now seemed within reach. In the months that followed, the legal process unfolded slowly, each court session dragging on like an eternity. She attended every single one, sitting silently in the front row, her gaze fixed on the defendant. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, reporters scribbling notes, and lawyers exchanging heated arguments. Through it all, she remained steadfast, clinging to the hope that the system would deliver justice. When the jury finally delivered a guilty verdict, sentencing him to 20 years in prison, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't closure, not completely, but it was a start. On the anniversary of her daughter's passing, she visited the cemetery, clutching a fresh bouquet of lilies. The air was crisp, the sky a soft gray. Kneeling beside the grave, she placed the flowers gently atop the headstone. Tears streamed down her face, but they carried a different weight this time. They weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude for fighting for her daughter, for uncovering the truth, and for ensuring that her memory wouldn't fade into silence. The days after the guilty verdict were a strange mix of relief and emptiness. For months, her life had revolved around uncovering the truth, chasing leads, poring over documents, and confronting people who might have answers. Now that it was over, She found herself unsure of what to do next. The courtroom drama had ended, but the ache in her heart remained as raw as ever. Justice had been served, yes, but justice couldn't bring her daughter back. She spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the world moving on without her child. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, birds chirped cheerfully, and neighbors went about their routines like nothing had changed. But everything had changed for her. She felt stuck, caught between two worlds, one where her daughter was still, alive, laughing and full of dreams, and another cold, harsh reality where she was gone forever. It was hard to reconcile the two. One afternoon, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, she stumbled upon a stack of photo albums. Dust coated the covers, and the pages smelled faintly of age. Flipping through them brought a flood of memories rushing back, her daughter's first steps, school plays, birthday parties, and lazy summer afternoons spent together. Each picture told a story, reminding her of the vibrant person she'd lost. As tears welled up in her eyes, she realized something important. Her daughter wasn't just a victim of tragedy. She was so much more than that. That realization sparked an idea, a way to honor her daughter's memory and channel her grief into something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, she began reaching out to other families who had lost loved ones under similar circumstances. Many of them were hesitant at first, unsure if they were ready to share their pain with a stranger. But as she opened up about her own journey, the sleepless nights, the unanswered questions, the fight for justice, they started opening up too. Slowly, a support group began to take shape. Meeting these families gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Listening to their stories, she saw reflections of her own struggle, the anger, the guilt, the endless what-ifs. Some had found ways to heal, while others were still searching for answers. Together they shared advice, comfort, and strength. What started as a small gathering in her living room soon grew into a community that met regularly. They called themselves A New Dawn, a name inspired by the hope they clung to despite their losses. But she didn't stop there. Determined to make a bigger impact, she decided to advocate for changes in how such cases were handled. She reached out to local authorities, urging them to improve accountability in investigations involving accidents and suspicious deaths. And why? First, her efforts were met with resistance. Bureaucracy moved slowly, and officials often dismissed her concerns as those of an emotional parent unable to let go. But she persisted, attending town hall meetings, writing letters, and even speaking at conferences. Her voice became impossible to ignore. Her advocacy work eventually caught the attention of a journalist who wrote a feature article about her story. The piece highlighted not only her personal loss but also the broader issues surrounding transparency and justice in such cases. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers across the country, thanking her for shedding light on a topic many had never considered before. Some shared their own experiences, while others offered words of encouragement. It was both heartbreaking and uplifting to know she wasn't alone in this fight. Through all of this, she discovered something unexpected within herself: resilience. Grief hadn't disappeared. It probably never would. But it no longer consumed her entirely. Instead, it fueled her determination to create change. Every speech she gave, every family she helped, every policy she pushed for, felt like a step toward ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. On quiet evenings, when the house was still and the world outside grew dark, she would sit by the window again. This time, though, she didn't stare blankly at the horizon. She thought about her daughter, not as a tragic figure frozen in time, but as someone whose life had mattered deeply, someone whose spirit lived on through the work she was doing now. And in those moments, she allowed herself to smile, knowing that her daughter's legacy was alive and well. As months turned into years, a new dawn continued to grow, becoming a beacon of hope for grieving families. The mother remained at its center, guiding others through the darkest chapters of their lives. Though her journey had started with unimaginable loss, it had transformed into something far greater, a mission to turn pain into purpose. And in doing so, she found a way to keep her daughter's memory alive, not just in her heart but in the hearts of everyone she touched along the way. The support group meetings became a lifeline not just for others but also for her. Each week she would sit in a circle with families who carried their own heavy burdens, stories of loss, unanswered questions, and broken hearts. Some came clutching, worn-out photographs, while others brought journals filled with scribbled thoughts or mementos that held pieces of their loved ones' lives. The room was always quiet at first, the weight of shared grief hanging thick in the air. But slowly, as people began to open up, the silence gave way to conversations that felt raw, honest, and healing. One evening, during one of these gatherings, a young woman spoke about losing her brother in a car accident. Her voice trembled as she described how the police had dismissed it as nothing more than a reckless driving incident. "But I know my brother," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He wasn't reckless. Something doesn't feel right." Hearing those words sent a chill through the mother's spine. It was like listening to herself from months ago. She leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on the young woman's shoulder. "You're not alone," she whispered. "We'll figure this out together." That moment ignited something new within her. It wasn't enough to simply provide emotional support. She wanted to help these families dig deeper, uncover truths, and find closure where possible. With the help of a few trusted friends, she started organizing workshops on navigating legal systems, understanding autopsy reports, and working with private investigators. These sessions weren't easy to put together. They required long hours of research, phone calls, and coordination, but seeing the relief on people's faces made every effort worthwhile. Word spread quickly about the work she was doing. Families traveled from neighboring towns and even other states to attend the meetings. One man, whose wife had died under mysterious circumstances, drove 5 hours just to join them. When he walked into the room for the first time, his eyes were hollow. His shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. By the end of the session, though, there was a glimmer of hope in his expression, a spark she recognized all too well. "Thank you," he said after everyone had left, his voice cracking. "For the first time, I feel like someone believes me." Her advocacy didn't stop at the local level. As more media outlets picked up her story, she received invitations to speak at larger events, conferences, seminars, and panels focused on justice reform and victim rights. At first, public speaking terrified her. Standing in front of a crowd, reliving her pain, felt like exposing her most vulnerable self. But each time she stepped onto the stage, she reminded herself why she was there: for her daughter, for the families counting on her, and for anyone else who might be silently suffering. One particular event stood out. It was a national conference on road safety and accountability, attended by hundreds of people, including lawmakers, activists, and survivors. As she stood behind the podium, gripping the edges tightly, she took a deep breath and began sharing her journey. She talked about the accident, the discovery of the mark on her daughter's temple, the fight for answers, and finally, the conviction of the person responsible. Her voice wavered at times, but she pressed on, determined to convey the importance of thorough investigations and transparency. When she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. People lined up afterward to shake her hand, hug her, or simply thank her for putting their struggles into words. A senator approached her, expressing interest in drafting legislation aimed at improving protocols for handling suspicious deaths. Another attendee handed her a business card, offering pro bono legal assistance for any family in need. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of optimism, not just for her cause, but for the future. Back home, life continued to evolve. The support group grew so large that they had to move meetings to a community center. Volunteers joined the effort, helping organize events, manage logistics, and offer counseling services. What had started as a small act of defiance against grief had blossomed into a movement driven by love and determination. And yet, despite its growth, the heart of it remained unchanged, a safe space where people could come together, share their pain, and find strength in each other. On quieter days when there were no meetings or speeches to prepare for, she found solace in simple rituals. She'd visit her daughter's grave, bringing fresh flowers and sitting beside it for hours. Sometimes she'd talk aloud, sharing updates about the group or recounting funny moments from her week. Other times, she'd sit in silence, letting the wind rustle through the trees above her. These visits weren't sad anymore, they were peaceful, almost comforting. They reminded her that her daughter was still part of her life, guiding her steps even in death. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled around her feet, she decided to write a letter to her daughter. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea steaming beside her, she picked up a pen and began pouring her thoughts onto paper. She wrote about the early days of grief, the anger and the confusion. She described the moment she discovered the mark on her temple and the relentless pursuit of truth that followed. She shared stories of the families she'd met, the victories they'd celebrated and the challenges they still faced. And then, near the end of the letter, she added something she hadn't said aloud in years. "I miss you more than words can ever express. But because of you, I found a way to keep going. You gave me purpose, even in your absence." Sealing the letter in an envelope, she tucked it away in a drawer alongside other keepsakes. Writing it had been cathartic, a reminder that while her daughter was gone, her impact lived on. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of laughter, the kind that echoed freely, untainted by sorrow. In her dream, her daughter stood beneath a bright blue sky, smiling and waving. When she woke up, sunlight streamed through the window, filling the room with warmth. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. The weeks that followed brought a renewed sense of energy to her work. With the support group thriving and her advocacy gaining momentum, she decided it was time to take things a step further. She had seen firsthand how broken the system could be, how easily cases were dismissed or mishandled when families lacked resources or connections. It wasn't enough to simply raise awareness. She needed to create tangible change. That's when the idea for a foundation came to her. She spent countless hours drafting plans, meeting with lawyers, and consulting nonprofit experts. The goal was clear: establish an organization dedicated to helping families navigate the complexities of suspicious deaths and accidents. They would provide free legal advice, connect people with trusted investigators, and offer emotional support throughout the process. Funding such an ambitious project seemed daunting at first, but she refused to let doubt stand in her way. To kickstart the effort, she organized a fundraising event, a community dinner held in the local hall. Flyers were posted around town inviting anyone and everyone to attend. On the night of the event, she stood nervously by the entrance watching as people trickled in. Neighbors, friends, strangers, all showed up, filling the room with chatter and warmth. Tables were adorned with simple decorations, candles, flowers, and photographs of loved ones submitted by attendees. Each photo told a story, a reminder of why they were all there. As the evening progressed, she took the stage, her heart pounding. Looking out at the crowd, she saw familiar faces alongside many she didn't recognize. Some nodded encouragingly, while others gave her sympathetic smiles. Taking a deep breath, she began speaking. "We're here tonight because we've all lost someone," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "But loss isn't the end of the story. Together we can make sure their voices are heard." Her speech struck a chord. By the end of the night, donations poured in. Not just money, but offers of help from volunteers eager to contribute. A retired detective offered his expertise in reviewing case files. A graphic designer volunteered to create promotional materials for the foundation. Even the local newspaper agreed to feature their mission in an upcoming issue. The outpouring of support overwhelmed her, reinforcing the belief that she wasn't alone in this fight. With the foundation officially launched, the real work began. Every day brought new challenges and opportunities. Families reached out from across the country, sharing their stories and seeking guidance. One call in particular stayed with her. A father described how his teenage son had died in what authorities labeled a hit-and-run accident. But the details didn't add up. The scene hadn't been properly investigated and key evidence had gone missing. Listening to him, she felt a surge of determination. She connected him with one of the foundation's volunteer lawyers and helped arrange a fresh investigation. Months later, when the case was reopened and justice finally served, the father sent her a heartfelt letter. "You gave me back my son's dignity," he wrote. Those words meant everything. Despite the progress, there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to pull her under. Late nights spent reviewing case files left her exhausted, both physically and emotionally. There were days when the pain of losing her own daughter felt sharper than ever, as if reopening old wounds. Yet, she reminded herself of the bigger picture. Every family helped, every truth uncovered. It mattered. If she could spare even one person the agony of unanswered questions, then every sacrifice was worth it. Her efforts also led to unexpected friendships. One woman whose sister had died under unclear circumstances became a regular presence at the Foundation's office. Initially shy and reserved, she gradually opened up, sharing not only her grief, but also her skills as a writer. Together, they collaborated on articles and blog posts aimed at educating others about navigating the legal system. Another volunteer, a young college student passionate about criminal justice reform, brought fresh ideas and boundless enthusiasm to the team. These connections reminded her that healing wasn't a solitary journey. It was something shared, built together. One afternoon, while sorting through letters and emails from grateful families, she stumbled upon a note that made her pause. It was from a mother who had attended one of the early support group meetings. "Before I met you," the letter read, "I thought I'd never smile again. Now, I wake up each morning knowing my daughter's memory is alive, in the good we're doing." Clutching the paper, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was why she kept going, not for recognition or praise, but for moments like this where love and resilience intertwined. As the seasons changed, so did the landscape of her life. The foundation grew, attracting more volunteers, donors, and supporters. Local schools invited her to speak to students about the importance of perseverance and empathy. Community leaders sought her advice on implementing reforms within the justice system. Through it all, she remained grounded, always remembering the reason behind it all: her daughter. On weekends, when the demands of the foundation eased slightly, she allowed herself moments of reflection. She'd sit in her backyard, sipping tea, and watching the leaves sway in the breeze. Sometimes she'd imagine her daughter sitting beside her, laughing and chatting like old times. Though those imaginings were bittersweet, they brought comfort too, a reminder that love transcended even death. And in those quiet moments, she found strength to keep moving forward, knowing her daughter's legacy lived on in every life touched by the foundation. The foundation's growth brought new challenges, but it also opened doors she never imagined. One day, a letter arrived in the mail from a government official inviting her to testify before a legislative committee. The topic was close to her heart: improving transparency and accountability in investigations involving suspicious deaths. At first, the thought of speaking in such a formal setting filled her with dread. But as she read the letter again, she realized this was an opportunity to make real, lasting change, not just for her family, but for countless others who had walked the same painful path. Preparing for the testimony took weeks. She pored over case studies, spoke with lawyers, and consulted experts in criminal justice reform. She wanted her words to carry weight, to cut through bureaucracy and reach the hearts of those listening. On the morning of the hearing, she dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel strong yet approachable. As she entered the grand hall where the committee met, she felt small under the high ceilings and rows of stern faces staring back at her. Her palms were sweaty, and her stomach churned with nerves, but she reminded herself why she was there. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I stand here today not just as a grieving parent, but as someone who has seen firsthand how flaws in our system can leave families without answers," she began. She shared her story, the accident, the discovery of the mark on her daughter's temple, the uphill battle for justice, and explained how these experiences shaped her mission. She talked about the families she'd helped, the cases they'd uncovered, and the gaps in the system that needed fixing. By the time she finished, The room was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers. Then applause broke out, first hesitant, then thunderous. For a moment, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The months following the hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Lawmakers introduced bills inspired by her testimony, aiming to improve protocols for handling suspicious deaths. News outlets covered the developments extensively, bringing even more attention to the Foundation's work. People called and emailed, sharing their stories and asking how they could help. It was overwhelming at times, but she welcomed the chaos because it meant progress was being made. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing notes for an upcoming interview, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from a woman whose brother had died in what authorities claimed was a workplace accident. "They're saying it was an equipment failure," the message read, "but I think something else happened." The mother immediately reached out, connecting the woman with one of the Foundation's volunteer investigators. Days later, after reviewing the case file, the investigator discovered inconsistencies in the report. With renewed hope, the woman pushed for a deeper investigation, determined to uncover the truth. Stories like this became a regular part of her life. Each success fueled her determination, but it also came with its share of setbacks. Not every case ended with justice served. Some investigations hit dead ends, leaving families frustrated and heartbroken all over again. There were nights when she lay awake, replaying these moments in her mind, wondering if she could have done more. Yet, she reminded herself that even small victories mattered: a reopened case, a revised policy, a grieving family finding solace in knowing someone believed them. Her personal journey continued to evolve alongside the Foundation's growth. On weekends, she started volunteering at a local shelter, serving meals to those in need. Helping strangers in a different context gave her perspective and reminded her of the importance of kindness in everyday life. One afternoon, while ladling soup into bowls, a young man approached her, his eyes red from crying. He hesitated before speaking, then blurted out, "My mom died last year and I still don't know what really happened." She put down the ladle, pulled up a chair, and listened. By the end of their conversation, he seemed lighter, as though sharing his burden had eased it slightly. Moments like these reinforced her belief in the power of connection. As word of her advocacy spread, invitations to speak at events poured in. From college campuses to community centers, she traveled across the country, sharing her story and urging others to take action. At one university, a student asked during the Q&A session, "How do you keep going when everything feels so hopeless?" She paused, thinking carefully before responding. "You focus on what you can control," she said. "For me, that's helping one family at a time, one case at a time. You don't have to fix everything overnight, just start somewhere." Back home, the support group remained the Foundation's heartbeat. Families gathered weekly, sharing updates, victories, and struggles. Newcomers often arrived hesitant, unsure of whether they belonged. But within minutes, they were embraced by the warmth of the group. One evening, a man stood up clutching a framed photo of his wife. His voice cracked as he described how the Foundation had helped him secure justice for her death. "Before I found this place, I thought I was alone," he said. "Now I know I'm not." Tears streamed down his face, but so did everyone else's. These gatherings weren't just about grief. They were about resilience, unity, and hope. On quieter days, when the demands of the Foundation eased, she allowed herself moments of reflection. She'd sit by the window, watching the world go by, and think about how far she'd come. Grief no longer consumed her entirely. Instead, it coexisted with purpose. She thought about her daughter often, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons she'd taught her, the strength she'd given her, and the legacy she'd left behind. One crisp autumn morning, she decided to plant a tree in her backyard. She chose a sapling with vibrant green leaves, symbolizing growth and renewal. Digging the hole and placing the roots into the soil felt cathartic, like planting a seed of hope for the future. As she patted the dirt around the base of the tree, she whispered softly, "This is for you." Though her daughter wasn't physically present, she felt her presence everywhere, in the laughter of the families she helped, in the changes she fought for, and in the quiet moments when love transcended loss. The tree she planted in her backyard became a symbol of everything she had worked for, a reminder that even in the harshest storms, roots could grow deeper and branches could reach higher. Over time, she found herself tending to it almost daily, watering it carefully and clearing away weeds. Watching the sapling thrive gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a tree. It was a living testament to resilience, much like the foundation itself. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of her life. The foundation continued to expand, drawing attention from all corners of the country. More volunteers joined the team, people who believed in the mission and wanted to make a difference. Lawyers offered their services pro bono, investigators donated their time, and artists created murals and artwork to raise awareness. Each new addition brought fresh energy and ideas, transforming what had once been a personal crusade into a collective movement. One day, while attending a community event hosted by the foundation, she met a young girl named Lily. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with bright eyes and a shy smile. Her mother explained that they were there because Lily's father had died in an accident months earlier. "She doesn't talk about him much," the mother said quietly, "but I think being here might help her heal." Intrigued, she knelt, down to Lily's level, offering a warm smile. "Do you want to tell me something about your dad?" she asked gently. At first, Lily hesitated, clutching her mother's hand tightly. But then, slowly she began to speak. She talked about how her father loved building things, birdhouses, toy cars, anything he could get his hands on, and how he always let her hammer the last nail. By the end of the conversation, Lily was beaming, holding up a tiny wooden birdhouse she'd made herself. Moved by the moment, she suggested starting a special program within the foundation, one focused on helping children cope with loss through art and creativity. The idea took off almost immediately, with workshops popping up across the region. These workshops became a cornerstone of the foundation's work. Kids gathered in colorful rooms filled with paints, clay, paper, and glue, creating projects inspired by memories of their loved ones. Some drew pictures, others wrote stories or built sculptures. One boy constructed a model airplane explaining proudly that his uncle had dreamed of becoming a pilot. Another girl painted a vibrant sunset, saying it reminded her of evenings spent fishing with her grandfather. These creations weren't just art, they were bridges connecting past and present, grief and healing. Seeing the impact of these programs reinforced her belief in the power of community. It wasn't just about finding answers or fighting for justice, it was also about rebuilding lives shattered by loss. Every family touched by the foundation carried its own unique story, yet they shared a common thread: the desire to honor their loved ones and keep their memories alive. And through this shared purpose, bonds formed that transcended individual pain. Her advocacy work eventually caught the attention of national media outlets. A documentary filmmaker approached her, proposing a project that would highlight the foundation's efforts and shine a light on systemic issues in the justice system. At first, she was hesitant. Reliving her journey on camera felt daunting, especially since it meant exposing her most vulnerable moments to a wider audience. But after consulting with trusted friends and colleagues, she agreed, seeing it as another opportunity to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced. Filming the documentary was an emotional roller coaster. Cameras followed her as she visited families, attended meetings, and spoke at events. They captured candid moments, tears shed over case files, laughter shared during support group sessions, quiet reflections in her backyard under the growing tree. One scene stood out vividly: a meeting where several families came together to celebrate milestones in their cases. As they cheered and hugged, the room buzzed with hope and determination. Watching it back during editing sessions, she realized how far they'd all come, not just individually, but collectively. When the documentary premiered, it aired on a major network, reaching millions of viewers. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people sharing their own experiences, thanking her for shedding light on a topic often overlooked. One letter in particular struck a chord. It was from a teenager whose older brother had died in a car crash years ago. "For so long I thought no one cared about what happened to him," the letter read. "Your story made me realize I'm not alone." Holding the paper in her hands, she felt tears welling up again, not of sadness, but of gratitude. This was why she kept going. Despite the recognition and accolades, she remained grounded, always remembering the reason behind it all. On weekends, when the chaos of running the foundation eased slightly, she returned to simple routines. She baked cookies for upcoming meetings, tended to the tree in her backyard, and spent hours writing letters to families she'd helped. Each note carried the same message: you are stronger than you know, and your loved one's memory matters. One crisp winter morning, as snow blanketed the ground outside, she sat by the window sipping tea. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to sit without thinking about the next task or challenge ahead. Instead, she reflected on the journey, the sleepless nights, the victories, the setbacks, and the countless lives touched along the way. Though the road had been long and difficult, she knew she wouldn't trade it for anything. Because through every step, she had found purpose. And as she gazed out at the snow-covered branches of the tree she'd planted, she whispered, softly, "Thank you." As the years rolled on, the foundation became more than just an organization. It was a beacon of hope for countless families. The tree in her backyard grew taller and stronger, its branches stretching toward the sky as if reaching for something beyond. She often found herself standing beneath it, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, thinking about how life had a way of blooming even in the darkest places. It reminded her that healing wasn't linear. It came in waves, moments of clarity followed by stretches of quiet reflection. The support group meetings were still held every week, but now they took place in a larger community center to accommodate the growing number of attendees. Families traveled from faraway towns, some driving hours just to be part of something that felt like home. Each session began with introductions, where newcomers shared their stories. Some spoke haltingly, their voices trembling with emotion, while others poured out their pain in torrents of words. No matter how different their journeys were, one thing united them all: the need to be heard, to know they weren't alone. One evening, during a particularly emotional meeting, a man stood up holding a small wooden box. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing a collection of letters written by his late wife. "She always said she wanted to leave behind a legacy," he explained, his voice cracking. "But I never realized I could help carry it forward." He went on to describe how, after connecting with the foundation, he'd started volunteering at a local shelter in memory of his wife's passion for helping others. By the time he finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. These moments, the raw, unfiltered humanity, were what kept the foundation alive. Her advocacy work also evolved. What had begun as a personal quest for justice transformed into a broader mission to address systemic issues within the legal system. She collaborated with lawmakers, researchers, and activists to push for reforms aimed at preventing similar tragedies. One landmark achievement was the passage of a bill requiring independent investigations in cases involving suspicious deaths. Standing beside government officials as they signed the legislation into law, she felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for everyone who had fought alongside her. Yet not everything went smoothly. There were days when frustration threatened to overwhelm her. Bureaucratic red tape slowed progress, and resistance from certain quarters tested her patience. But she learned to lean on the people around her, the volunteers, the families, the friends who believed in the cause as much as she did. Together, they celebrated victories big and small, knowing that change didn't happen overnight. On quieter days, she allowed herself to dream about the future. The foundation had already accomplished so much, but she knew there was still work to be done. Plans were underway to expand its reach internationally, partnering with organizations abroad to share resources and strategies. She envisioned a world where no family would have to face loss alone, where truth and accountability were guaranteed rights, not privileges. One spring afternoon, as she walked through the bustling streets of the city, she noticed a mural painted on the side of a building. Vibrant colors depicted scenes of unity, a circle of hands joined together, a tree with deep roots, and words etched boldly across the bottom. Love lives on. She stopped to take it in, realizing it was inspired by the Foundation's message. A young artist approached her, smiling shyly. "We wanted to honor what you've done," he said. Overwhelmed, she thanked him, feeling a lump rise in her throat. This was her daughter's legacy, alive and thriving in ways she could never have imagined. Back home, surrounded by photos, letters, and mementos collected over the years, she sat down to write another letter. This one wasn't addressed to anyone specific. It was more of a journal entry, a way to process everything she'd been through. "When I first walked into that morgue, I thought my life was over," she wrote. "But instead it was just beginning. You taught me how to turn pain into purpose, how to find strength in vulnerability, and how to keep going even when the road feels impossible." She tucked the letter away in a drawer alongside others, each one a snapshot of her journey. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the room, she stepped outside to water the tree. Its bark was rough under her fingertips, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. For a moment, she closed her eyes, imagining her daughter standing beside her, laughing and talking as if nothing had changed. When she opened them again, the ache in her chest was lighter, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of a field filled with trees, each one planted by someone touched by the Foundation, their branches intertwined, forming a vast canopy that stretched endlessly. Beneath them, families gathered, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. In the distance, she saw her daughter, waving and smiling. And though she couldn't hear her voice, she felt it in her heart, a whisper reminding her that love truly does live on. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through her window, she woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The journey hadn't ended, it never would, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Every family helped, every truth uncovered, every life touched, carried her daughter's spirit forward. And as long as she kept moving, kept fighting, kept believing, that spirit would continue to shine brightly, lighting the way for others.